I get to interview the journalist. You don't get to ask some questions this time. I'm pretty excited about that.
This is a treat for me. This is really a gift you're giving me, actually. So
well, we wanted to have you on because you have talked to everybody. You've talked to leaders of every industry and domain, and you've asked them very tough questions, sometimes on the record and sometimes off.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
So we're really interested to hear what you're seeing out there and what you're thinking about, what you're worried about. But first, we're going to talk about fly fishing.
We are. Do you mind?
Yeah, do it.
Thanks. It's so great to be
I've
home.
never been fly fishing, but you have.
I have, and I'm going to take you. It's going to be a transformational experience. And I first of all, I'm just so happy to be home. Oh, Heather, oh my God. One of my favorite CEOs, on and off the record. So yes, that distracted me for a second. So yes, I have learned the hard way over 7 years of talking about race and culture in corporate America that not everyone's ready for the conversation right off the bat. And everybody here is magic. You're doing the work and you are inspiring to me, and I'm humbled to be here and I'm happy to be back. But most of the people that I talk to are much more nervous, particularly after the George Floyd's murder. I talk to a lot of people, a lot of very nervous executive teams who don't feel that they have the shared common language, that feel the identity threat that's all coming for them. They don't know what to do and they don't know where they are. And I can sum up what I've learned over the last 7 years in a relatively simple sentence, which is a good gateway for bigger conversation. But I learned I've taken me a while to get there. So I need to just carve out 3 minutes.
We are here for it. Do the whole thing.
All right. So the story that I start with is fly fishing, because they're already nervous that the race lady has showed up, and she's like, well, this is going to be awful. I can't believe I have to go to this thing. It's like, we're going to talk about the outdoors. We're going to talk about fly fishing and how it's changed my life. I've been fly fishing for about 12 years now. It's the thing that I can say has brought me probably the most joy of anything that I've learned or discovered outside of just my family and my life. But here's the thing about fly fishing. It's all just a trick. It is your job to present the fish with a thing that looks exactly like the real thing that it wants to eat at that particular moment in time, that looks delicious and perfect. And it's very hard to do because trout are really good at being trout, and I'm not good at waving in front of their faces.
This sounds like parenting my children.
It does, exactly. It sounds like a lot of things. It's not a volume business. You're not going to be feeding your children when I take you fly fishing. But it is a nerd's game, and it's an endless puzzle. And technique is everything, and you just become part of something much bigger than yourself. You learn about air pressure and snow melt and how to tie knots and water flow and follow the mating habits of bugs like paparazzi chasing Kardashians. And it's really fun. And you also learn really challenging things like how climate change is allowing bark beetles to continue to live over the increasingly warming winters in the West. It's killing off just acres and acres of ponderosa pine trees, which, by the way, smell like vanilla cake. I know. I love that I know this. They smell like vanilla cake. You get your face right in there. Not vanilla, not cake, vanilla cake. And I love going back to Montana and smelling the trees, but I also see more and more dying off, and I know what's coming. I have a favorite trout. Here's something I never thought I would say. He's a huge dude. He lives under a bridge in Rock Creek, which is 90 miles outside of Missoula. I tricked him just for a second once. He got right off my hook, but I will trick him again, and then I'm going to let him go, because that's actually the rule, but also it's just so important to be part of something bigger than yourself, and I love that. I describe myself as a quasi-cynical girl from Harlem, USA. That was before I became an Avon lady. I didn't know anyone who fished like that, and I never expected to. It really changed me in a way to join an ecosystem already in progress. It's just,
love that.
I'm still like over
Love
it.
that.
So here's the other thing about fly fishing. This is the point in my story where everyone's like, okay, here comes the race
How does
part.
this relate?
I know. I've never met a person of color on or associated with the river. Not in a fly shop, not a ranger, not a river guide, nothing. You meet a woman every now and then, but it's not like there's a sisterhood of the traveling waiters and we immediately bond. There's just nobody out there. Once, I met a black man in a tiny brew pub in a very, very small town in Montana, and we met eyes. And we both thought the other one was in witness protection, 100%. That's the big, there's no other reason for us to be there. So on one level, it's normal. I'm the only one. My mother's family is white. I was the only one in my college. Journalism has been a pretty lonely profession when you're talking about the kinds of things I like to talk about. But here's the real thing about fly fishing, and now everyone's like totally getting to the point now. People of color, black people, and when you're talking about the national park system, we're lonely by design. And that's when we start to talk about what's actually happening in the world. The national park system, which was created and turned on 100 in 2016, was created in large part by a conservationist, maybe you've heard of him, a zoologist, and a very influential guy named Madison Grant. He was also a white supremacist and a virulent racist. He was like one of the most vile people to ever publish in the United States. He wrote a book called The Passing of the Great Race. You can imagine what race he was worried about at the time, which was immensely popular with leaders when it was published in 1916 and armed generations of leaders with pseudoscience enough to justify segregation, eugenics, race war, workplace discrimination, and the violent oppression of inferior races, and lots of other people who decided he could call inferior.
And had a not small influence on the national park system.
He's responsible for it. If you like the Bronx Zoo, you can thank him too. He went to Yale and Columbia. He was friends with very influential people. Teddy Roosevelt, future and then former president, loved the book so much he wrote a blurb for it.
I did not know that.
Oh, yikes! So if you like Yellowstone Park, you can thank Madison Grant. But if you believe that immigrants are filthy criminals and running around doing a lot of raping and terrible things, he's part of the reason why. And now at this point, if you're nervous about race, you're sort of looking at me like, oh, okay, this is a bigger thing than I was thinking about. So Grant and his friends thought of the national park system as a respite for manly white men who needed to refresh their spirit in the face of this threat to their great race. And 100 years later, the National Park System, who was doing great work, by the way, had a terrible diversity report. Black people felt unwelcome there. Black people for generations have felt unwelcome in the cultivated outdoors where business has typically been done. That was me doing tennis. This is me doing golf. So when we fight about affirmative action or the business case for diversity, which we should not be discussing anymore, or immigration policy and what we're allowed to talk about in schools, or like why everyone hates drag queens all of a sudden, oh my goodness, even though we may not know his name anymore, it is the ghost of Madison Grant that's haunting us all. And here's where I bring it all together. If my father were alive today, a man born to a single mom who knew former slaves, witnessed lynchings, served in World War II in the segregated army, came home to South Carolina and couldn't vote, and he also couldn't get a special mortgage reserved for veterans thanks to Teddy's cousin Franklin and his racially problematic New Deal, right? But he managed to migrate his way up to Harlem anyway to become a social worker, and as a lifelong renter was unable to transfer any wealth to his only daughter other than his Social Security survivor benefits. If my father was alive today and heard me tell you, he'd be madly in love with all of you, by the way. You are miracles to me and him. But if he heard me tell you that I'd like to spend my free time standing in Madison Grant's America trying to trick some damn fish, what would he say? Yeah, I think he would say, I hope that sound that's coming up behind you is in fact a grizzly bear, right? So if I've learned one thing from the last few years establishing the race beat at Fortune is that it's baked into so much, racism is baked into so much of what we see. We don't even see it anymore. And you can't see the bottom, and yet that's what we're asking everyone to do. People who are largely unprepared to do it, and they're asking them to do it in real time. Customers, community members, investors, and board members, everybody. So my simple takeaway, and this is usually the gateway, everyone's calm now. We stopped talking about fishing, we're talking about race, and we're all still surviving, is that if you want to be an effective, inclusive leader, is to notice who isn't in the room, or in my case, the forest, and ask why. When you ask why, that's when the work begins. And it's design work, by the way. Who's not in your LinkedIn feed, who's not at your kid's birthday party, who's not on your team, who's not on your board, who's not in your supply chain. There's a million ways to ask it. But the biggest takeaway is you can't redesign the system if you can't see it. That's a big piece of the work. And you won't redesign the system if your power, ego, wealth, status depends on you not seeing it. And that's when the conversation typically begins.
Love it. That's a great way to start.
That's my fly fishing.
And if any of you know someone at the National Park System, we would like to meet them.
They're working on it. So that's the thing I really admire.
They are doing well, actually.
This is pre woke, being blamed for everything. They decided they were going to own it, and it was really important. And so more and more people have access to the outdoors and what that means, and more people have access to each other. So I admire them for that, and I appreciate it.
The point about underlying systems and often invisible systems, I think, is a perfect transition to sort of the title of the talk, which is a deep worry you have about senior leaders and the disconnect they have with ordinary employees about what's being done in the realm of DEI, and sort of one perspective of, look at all we've done, and the other perspective of, you've only just begun, or I'm not seeing the results, or that's a lot of posturing and nothing has really changed. And that disconnect is really top of mind for you. So I wonder if you'd say a little bit more about it.
I will, and thank you for that. And I'm struggling, and we talked about this when we were preparing, is to always try to have a hopeful message. And I struggle with optimism, but not hope, because I feel like they live in two different places in your body. So I'm hopeful, but I am worried, and I'm on point. I started this beat in 2016, and I honestly didn't think much was going to happen. I didn't think I'd last very long. I also thought things were going to go better somehow.
Good on them, though, for giving you that beat, and for you made it the way that you made it. It was pretty incredible to watch it all happen.
I appreciate that. I mean, I thought it was just going to be the occasional outlier, some diversity reports that didn't move, and reminding people not to be racist at Halloween. But things really, every year, I just rerun it. They don't even notice, like, stop it. But a lot of things happened really quickly. Even back then, I think with the advent of the Trump administration, people were really on edge for a couple of reasons. And an entire line of communication was unleashed, where it was acceptable to say certain things. It was acceptable to be anti-Semitic in public. It was acceptable to be, a perfectly good-looking, entry-level looking employee and walk around with tiki torches. Everything was really very strange. And senior leaders were asked to weigh in on some pretty heavy-duty stuff, from Charlottesville to the trans ban, the bathroom ban. Like, all of a sudden we've got amicus briefs, and all of a sudden we've got these open letters. And as time has gone on, and of course George Floyd during the pandemic was one of the most moving moments, terrible thing that happens in the United States all the time, every day. For some reason, this was the moment. Ignited enough of a national conversation where people, very senior people who did not see the system.
Things started to happen.
They started to see the system, and it started with some, all of you have a story like this in your life. Senior leaders around you, or maybe you, started asking people that you knew. Jim, you've been my, black lieutenant for all these years. I had no idea that you're worried about your kid and the police. And these very candid conversations happen. And when I saw progress was I saw a senior leader being willing to learn in real time how to talk about how to learn the language of inclusion in real time. That's a very courageous thing to do. We don't pay CEOs not to know. And PayPal was mentioned before. Dan Schulman is one of them. I don't want to get into too many names. Cisco, it's just being right out of my head. But the amazing work was done on a personal level that trickled down into actual system change. And it was very difficult, and everyone was involved, and it was not easy, and it continues to happen.
And now what's happening?
I think that we're seeing, if someone was going to wobble because they didn't quite understand it, or they felt under threat, right? Yeah. Or if they're asked to explain wokeism like 4 times and they got it by the 5th time they snap, then they're going to start retreating from the work.
They already have started, I would argue.
Yes, I would.
There's a retreat from this work that I have noticed that is deliberate and sort of seizing on the moment to reduce.
I agree. And some of it is last in, first out. We need to cut ranks, and also, I was not really on board anyway. And this is a nice to have. This is not a must have, and we need to work on our productivity. I know. We can just go back to the way things were, because let's be honest. If your identity depends on the system continuing in the way that you train to compete within the system, then co-creating a world where you're sharing power in a different way, and you don't understand, you can't plan your compensation anymore, and your career path seems less certain, it's going to be a harder sell for a very senior person. So I have a bicameral life at Fortune. Like Fortune, we talk to very senior people, we care about them. All of our lists sort of focus on them. And between my work at the podcast, I contribute to a podcast called Leadership Next, which is all CEOs. And then just my life just wandering around asking bigger questions about how the world can be better and what's actually happening for people. I hear we're pressing ahead, we're not there yet, but we're moving ahead, which is legitimately true. And then I hear from a lot of people in the middle, it's like, no,
I think a lot of people got stalled on sort of the 101, maybe the 201 level stuff, and they keep doing that on repeat, but we haven't really progressed to the systemic level in a lot of cases, and it's particularly hard to push that through right now. And so for those of you doing the work, I really appreciate how hard it got, and it got harder the last 9 months, I really think.
I really appreciate all of you, and I really appreciate you if you feel like you're the only one in your department who is asking for some basic things. What people who have been marginalized, the only ones, the people who are lost wandering in the woods, have typically asked for was to trust you, to trust that there is a path forward for me that is actually for me.
Yep.
And that's hard. And sometimes what they're asking for is some really basic things, like salary transparency almost always comes up. It's like, I need to know that I need to know how people are compensated and where I am to benchmark it with. Coqual has a great series of research reports around that. I need to actually see people who look like me, who I know there are talented people around here who look like me, who are in positions of power, who are making decisions, who are helping to shape and redesign this.
Those are both great examples of sharing power. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head, right? So if it was just share power and be willing, take that risk, and share it in an interesting and well-designed way, but share it.
Can I add to that for a second?
Yeah.
So one of the things I talk about when I talk to people is not just sharing power, and here's my emotional story about it. It's quicker than my fly fishing story.
We like your stories. You just go for it.
So one of the things that was the hardest about this beat that I didn't expect was, and nor did I prepare for or train for, was having to watch a video of not only men, but mostly men being shot by the police. And I did it because I'm a reporter. I'm doing it because I had to verify and have the whole context. And so because if you don't want to watch that, then I am the person who can validate for you that this is a serious issue and it's a growing issue. So one night, my husband's white. Look at me, I can't even. My poor little stress. So one night we're in bed. My husband's mainstream white man, consultant. Openly consultant. He's a leadership consultant, and the best people in the world. So he says to me, honey, something's happened, but I'm going to check it. I'm like, okay, what is that? Is it the furnace? Like, what's happening? He said, no, there's something in the news, but I better check it. It was Ahmaud Arbery. Like, okay, I wasn't even paying attention. So he checks it. And he says, I'm sorry, babe, you're going to have to check it.
You're going to have to deal with this tonight.
And so he did it a couple more times, and it didn't dawn on me until a few times he had done it when I realized he was trying to share my fear.
Yeah.
He was trying to share my fear. There's no way this sort of tall, good-looking consultant is afraid of the police. I am mortally afraid of the police. And he's never going to have the response to this. I mean, he's going to have a horror response, but like that I am going to have. And there's nothing he can do about it. He can't take that away from me. He can't take that away from the world. But he can get there first.
He can scout it a little bit for you.
He can get there first, and he let me know I'm not alone. And I thought, okay, that's something. Can we get, in addition to sharing power, can we figure out how to share fear?
Yeah, share the stress.
That's right. I mean, because bringing your whole self to work is an identity issue.
That's great.
You know, and it happened. Our identities are changing all the time. Are you afraid because you recently had a miscarriage and you don't know what to say? Are you afraid because you got divorced? Are you afraid because no one knows you're gay or no one knows you're Muslim? Or because you're new at the company, you don't want to roll up your sleeves because you've got body art and you're afraid you're going to be judged? Can we anticipate where people are going to feel afraid or nervous? Can we pre-mortem that? Or can we just signal that even though I'm not that, I don't want you to be afraid. I don't want you to feel alone. And this is where the hopefulness piece comes in, is that as more and more people, regardless of whether they stay in their organizations, I know everybody loves to leave, I saw the slide, is that you're bringing a new shared language that's still evolving to your next organization, and you're bringing these habits of looking and noticing and sharing. And I'm hopeful about that.
Love that. That makes me feel good. I got one question for you, and then we'll go to some audience ones if they're out there. What is something that you want to put our attention on? What is something that deserves more attention than it's getting, or something where it's maybe not getting the depth or the backing or the resourcing that it really deserves?
That's a good question. So two things that come to mind, and something else might come to mind as well, is that underrepresented people, particularly people with disabilities, but any of us who are not the ones that you see when you see leadership potential, are the original hackers. Like, we reorganize things to get shit done that people don't understand. The disability community is one that I'm mostly worried about, and the press to go back to work so I can be supervised is, what does it mean to lose the kinds of access that finally professionals with disabilities were having? We reorganize things, we find people, we know who they are, we create networks. It's part and parcel of being out of power.
And have incredible entrepreneurial muscle memory.
You absolutely have to do it. And if you want to try to game the system, it's like, find a way to tap into that level of innovation, reward it. It's a different kind of upskilling. It's a different kind of credentialing. But I'm telling you, it happens every single time. We know who the other ones are, and we are rooting for each other.
Love it.
And the other one is, and I don't know if this is an investment so much, but I'm embarrassed by how much I'm surprised by how bad things continue to get and how weird things are. Like the Silicon Valley Bank thing, it's like, you're bringing wokeness, that's just, oh God, no. But I do think that at some point, people need to be held accountable. They just absolutely need to be held accountable. It's not just because they're not getting there. There's just people who just won't. They're just not gonna do it. They're just barriers, and they need to be held accountable. And that's what good people are afraid of a public mob. And I understand that. I get attacked all the time on social media, and I don't like it. But I know my heart's in the right place. I'm doing the work. But people who are legitimate barriers to progress just simply do not get called out enough, and they don't get called out by each other.
Hell yeah. Okay.
That's just me. What about you? What are
y'all thinking about? Raz got a mic, and here we are, way on the left here.
I have a nasty cold, but I'm not. I'm cleared to travel. I do have a mask, and I'm not contagious, and I don't have COVID. But I feel self-conscious about my B. Arthur voice today.
You just can't sniffle or sneeze in public ever again.
No, I know. I want people to know that.
What do you think?
Hi there. Yeah, I just want to first of all thank you for being so real and tackling some of these issues just straight on. My question is similar and it's probably loaded, but kind of talking about this collective sorrow, right, and this anticipation of what some might be experiencing, and that empathy involved. It's definitely I love that you're talking about it and that it's developing. What recommendations or approaches would you have to those who might still be rather early in understanding that? In this society of polarization right now, in our families and our workplaces, not everyone is as understanding of that, and there's a lot of fear.
How do I fix my uncle?
Yeah, how do you handle that, and how would you recommend handling?
That's a great
like
question.
That?
So more senior people in your life who don't understand this?
Yeah, I think about some close family members who respond to wokeism and racism with fear and shutting down rather than collective sorrow and accountability and those types of things.
Aww.
And I think about in the professional environments, where a lot of people advocate for kind of taking those subjects out of the professional world.
Yeah.
I think I really stand with what you're saying, where it's important to be part of those conversations and sharing that together.
Yeah.
How do you handle relationships with those types of people?
So I have a bunch of little micro pieces of advice. The most important one is be very patient and take very good care of you, and accept where they are in their journey. And this is not your job to change them, but it is your job to live your life the way that you want to live your life and lead the way that you want to lead. That's really important. And you may have to set limits around some of those conversations. But the thing that I learned recently from new research from folks at the Perception Institute, and if you don't know them, I love them, they're just amazing, who helped me understand why the fly fishing story was so powerful, was so helpful to people, not just a stalling mechanism, was that it painted an image of a shared world. And storytelling and framing goes a long way in helping people feel comfortable that this is not their fault and that they're not crazy. Like, I just wake up one day and everything's crazy. Like, that's sort of the energy they bring to this. But that there's an alternate shared world, shared vision of where everyone gets to participate that's not based on the fundamental attribution bias of that if I don't see any black people here, it's because black people are no good. Is that the world is not accommodating all kinds of people. Who else is not here? And it takes time, it takes patience. There's no magic story, there's no magic bullet, there's no magic data point. But the fundamental attribution bias problem that we're all facing is so built into our identities It's like, oh, you come to tell, so you're telling me that my pastor and my teacher and my mother and my grandma, they were all wrong? It's like, well, they didn't have enough information yet. And when you're ready, you can come along. You can see, that kind of thing.
Hard to argue with your own story.
Well, yeah, and it's hard to argue with the fact that you get to take your power back, and wish them well. It's like a Gwyneth Paltrow joke now, so I'm going to move on. But love them anyway, but limit their ability to take your power away.
You can love them and challenge them at the same time.
You can, and you should, but you shouldn't do it to the point where it just destroys your life.
I worry about so many people here for the same reason. Like, I'm worried about y'all. Are you okay? Like,
Yeah.
this is a crowd, and there's a lot of you in this room who do this work in different ways. And taking care of yourself. I love that you said that. I think it's really, really important.
And we should talk more about that when we have a chance to sort of, hang out a little bit, because I think it's the fundamental issue of the modern leadership age. Now, leadership is changing so much, and the leader's job, we know this. We've got a great CEO right here. Your job is to say the same thing over and over and over again, and message this thing and make every single person feel like this is the first time that you've said it. You have to own it. But that's not your job with your relatives. It's not your job with your managers. But you can live it.
Love that. Okay, I think we're over here.
First of all, thank you. Super inspired, super moved. You're a very powerful storyteller, and I think you're a very strategic storyteller. You've chosen certain narratives to weave into your time with us here. And so following up on this question around using stories to drive change, how might you guide us to think within organizations around what stories to look for, what stories to tell? I don't think there's a silver bullet to your point, but I think there probably is a way of thinking about it to break through in the ways that you need to people who are hard to reach.
So that's a wonderful question, and I think we should all live in the question of what's a good story. It's first that's going to hit you. There's going to be something that hits you that's true. Sit with it. Tell it to a few people. Just like, what is interesting about this story, and that because these are stories to build and not to distance. Then you don't need a hero. You don't need like a heroic arc, but you do need to end in a beautiful place that we can all look to together. That was what and there doesn't have to be perfect. In my husband's story, he is kind of the hero, but it was just such a simple and natural thing to do, to care about somebody else who was different from you. And I was able to pay that story forward and think, well, what does a benefit system look like for this? But I find a story like that has moved you, that you've noticed, now that you're in the I need to notice and ask why mode, stories are going to start to bubble up for you. Just collect them, don't have to do anything with them. When a light pops on, just pop it in a box, and you'll have collected all of these wonderful stories. And can you link them to a behavior, an action, idea, process, or a product? That's people are going to remember the story. It's going to help them remember why they're working on this, even when it gets hard. But it is a wonderful way to stay human in the workplace.
Love it. I think we have time for maybe one more if it's out there. And if not, I think that's
our time.
Okay, great. Hey, I want to say a compliment to Ellen, because when we started Culturati, there was no reporter covering management and culture and DEI at all, much less the way that you do. And Fortune is the magazine of record of power.
Yeah.
And you are in there. And we're so proud to know you, and we love reading you, and we're so happy that you're here with us on stage. So
I love coming home to Culturati. Thank you so much for always including me, and thank you all for just being the most wonderful community convening there is. I go to a lot of them, and you all are really special. So thank you.
Thank you so much.